In the old days of flight simulation, but also in the real world, if you wanted to get from A to B, you had to hop from one radio tower to the next one, literally chasing signals on the ground. But today we've got RNAV. It is the backbone of modern flight planning, and if you aren't using it properly in Microsoft Flight Simulator, you're essentially flying with one hand tied behind your back. Today we're going from Magneto line basics to advanced RMP logic. Welcome to a new episode of Microsoft Flight Simulator A to Z. Today we arrived at the letter R, which stands for RNAV. Let's get into it. RNAV stands for Area Navigation. Traditionally, pilots using VORs, ground-based towers that beam signals. You could only fly directly toward or away from them. It was like a train on tracks. RNAV breaks those tracks. By using GPS and onboard computers, your plane can fly any path between two coordinates. This is why we can have complex, curved arrivals into airports tucked between mountains. As we move to the advanced side, you'll see the term RMP, which stands for Required Navigation Performance. RNAV is the ability to fly a path, RMP is the requirement to stay on it. If your chart says RMP 0.3, your plane is constantly monitoring itself to ensure it's within 0.3 nautical miles of the center line. If the GPS signal gets fuzzy, you'll get an unable RMP alert. Also watch your waypoints. Most are flyby, where the plane cuts the corner to stay smooth. But look for a circle around the waypoint on your chart that's a flyover. The plane must pass directly over it before turning. Misreading these is the first reason simmers think their autopilot is broken during a turn. So this is a chart of RNP for runway 24 for Rotterdam The Hague Airport. So let's go to it. First of all, in the center we see the route which we need to fly. In this case we can start at Dovmu and then fly to the next beacon, Kaku, Rewick, RD203, Atwit, RD252, and then the last one, which also contains that circle which we discussed earlier. So for the one with the circle, we know we need to fly to it, where the other ones are a little bit more flexible. Besides that, if we look back, we can see that we need to fly a heading of 235, and that RD252 is likely one of the latest NAV-8s before we hit the runway. In addition to that, you can see all the previous beacons which we're going to visit, but if we move to the start, we can see Dovmu, right, which is also the IAF. So this is the point where we need to start with the approach in this case. Now if we move a little bit to the top, we can see also a lot of details, including the final approach course, the altitude, right, at RD252 we need to be at 2000 because else we won't be able to intercept the glide path. And then here we see something which might got your attention. It says LPV Cat 1 DA, decision altitude, refer to the minimums. And those minimums are described on the bottom of the chart. So if we go down, we can see this part. And this part describes a lot of information. First of all, here you see the STD state. This is where you can see the decision altitude for the LPV Cat 1. You can see that there's a difference in some cases, because if it's straight in landing with LNAV and VNAV, then it's a little bit higher compared to the STD state, which we will do in the video. So in this case, the Cessna is an A-class aircraft, and if you don't know which type of aircraft you have, then one tip, use for example a search engine or an AI tool to figure out which aircraft you're flying with. And then we know in this case that the decision altitude is roughly 220, where we need to decide, okay, hey, are we gonna land or are we gonna do, let's say, the missed approach, which is by the way also seen here by that dotted line. That's the missed approach. And also we need to climb to 2000 in this case. But moving back to this part, we can see also interesting information. So at Atwit, right, 2000 feet, 235, that's the course. And then here we see, I'd say, the starting point of our descent, right? This is 3 degrees roughly. We need to start at RD252 and then we're descending. And here you see some small things which you might think, hey, what is this? These are the decision altitudes, the different ones per category. And that's where you need to decide, hey, what I'm gonna do. But what I saw in some other videos from, I would say, official pilot is that you sometimes decide earlier because it takes some time before you need to, let's say, increase the power, etc. So keep in mind that this is the minimum altitude, but likely will also start earlier. Another thing which you need to understand is that once you are, let's say, very low and you hit that decision altitude, that's where you will switch off the autopilot, or ideally a little bit earlier, because the aircraft or the autopilot won't take you to the ground. Because what you will see is once you bypass this point, it will go into kind of a still mode, right? It will continue to fly the altitude and fly the heading, which is currently flying. And that's of course not what we want, because in that case we will never land on, in this case, runway 24. So now we looked at it, let's jump inside the aircraft and let's look at how we can do this. So we're inside the aircraft, so let's see how we can, I would say, program the approach. So we're going to do that by pressing the prog button, then select the approach by hitting enter, and then we're going to view if we can find the RNAV. In this case, RNAV GPS 24 LPV, that's the one we need. We're going to press enter, then we're going to look for DOVMU, which is the IAF, and then we're going to set the minimums. You can either leave them off, but you can also use this small knob to switch it on. We'll switch to borrow minimums, and then you can use the large knob to move to the FT, and that's the feet of course, and then you can set the decision altitude, in this case to 20 roughly. And once you've done that, you can either load it if you're far away from the airport, or you can say directly I want to activate it. In this case I'm going to activate it, and that's how you program the RNAV approach. Because this flight will take some time, I will skip some part and we will continue once we're almost at the airport. So we're almost there, right? We're almost on that final approach. As you can see, the aircraft will start to turn to the left, and you can see that we're pretty close to that last beacon, right? Which was it? RD252? Yes, I think that was the one. As you can see the runway already. You can see the PAPI lights on the left side of the runway already. So let's make sure that we're preparing the aircraft correctly. So we've done everything what we need to do. And what we will now do is we will activate the approach mode really soon. And what you will see is that the approach mode will not be activated because there's that GP glide path which I told you about. Besides that, what you will see is the GPS and LPV next to the vertical horizon. So those are the things which are cool. And what you will now see is that that pink, I would say, triangle will drop down, because we're coming closer and closer to that last say navigate, right? RD252. So what you will see happening really soon as we hit that beacon, likely it will start activating that GP, that glide path, which is super nice and super handy to use, of course, because hey, who wants to descend manually? Well, I don't want to do it, maybe you want, but let's see how it works. I see that I need to adjust the throttle a little bit, need to avoid we're going too fast, but also avoid we're going too slow. So you always need to tune it a little bit. So that's always, I would say, something which you of course need to keep in mind, right? It's an autopilot, but you still are, I would say, managing the aircraft yourself. We're still going good, keeping an eye on the GP mode. We're 0.7 nautical miles from RD252, which is also known as the FAF, right? That's where the descent will start. So you will see in a few seconds. Fingers crossed it will work, of course. You will see that the mode will become active. And you can see that pink thing, that pink, I would say, triangle coming closer. And here you can see the GP mode, the glide path has kicked in. And what you will now see is that the aircraft will start descending, right? Because it needs to make sure that we'll follow that track. Here you can see it starts descending automatically. We don't need to do anything. Minus 250, and depending on if it needs to make a lot of corrections, it might go steeper or not. And this is really how it works, and this will bring us down to the runway. Well, not completely, because remember what I said about that bar minimum? That's where you need to disconnect the autopilot, and the rest of it you need to do it yourself. So keep that in mind. This is not ILS, this is not fully land the aircraft on the runway. There are still some things which you do need to do manually, because else what will happen is you would continue to fly at an altitude of 210 feet in this specific direction, and that's again not what you want, as I already mentioned earlier. In this case what you will see is that the pink triangles are both nicely aligned, so we're flying the correct heading. We're also making the correct descending path of 3 degrees, making our way down to the runway, which goes let's say really fast, as you can see.
Cleared to land runway 24, Cessna X-ray Golf Sierra.
So also the call from the traffic tower, right, from the ATC, we're allowed to land, which is always nice to hear. So we now have the confirmation, so we can continue the descent, right? If we wouldn't have the clarification right now, likely we would have, let's say, abort the let's say procedure and would do a go around or something, which is also on the map as explained earlier in this video. So we're going to 1000 feet. And the other nice thing is that let's say pink line next to the altitude, that shows us how, let's say, steep we're descending. In this case 450. You can see it makes some small corrections. It still is good. And yes, for those who are paying attention, there's still 2000 feet, so we're not using VNAV for this part because it's not needed. You could use the VNAV functionality of the Cessna G1000 NXi to do the descending to the 2000 feet and then switch to the approach mode. But since we were flying already 2000 feet, there was no need to do it. Need to look at the power a bit, need to adjust the power. We also say I don't want to crash into it. You can see that I'm going a little bit too fast, so likely I would need to reduce my power a bit. We're 2.3 nautical miles from the destination, which is runway 24 MAP, which is the runway itself. You can see the bearing is 235 currently, but this line is still perfectly centered. So we can continue or descend into the airport, Rotterdam The Hague Airport. So you can see the speed decreases now a bit. And I don't need to do anything yet, but we're coming close to that 210 feet, which is the decision altitude. And that's something where we need to take action, because we need to disable the autopilot and take control of the aircraft ourselves. How cool is that, right? We can do most of the part automatically, but only do the last part, I would say, manually. Yeah, last part manually, that's what I want to say. So we're braking to the 400 feet. And now you also see the blue line, right? The blue line, that's the decision altitude which we configured. You can see that's the decision altitude, right? It comes closer and closer. So we soon need to disable the autopilot, because else things will go wrong. You can see it will start becoming white, from blue to white. So let's disable the autopilot now. Let's do it. Here we go. So the autopilot is disabled. Almost. Yes, here we go. Then I need to watch out because I also need to fly, correct? So I'm making a lot of weird moves. You can also see that completely turns red, the radar system. So I'm not sure what's going on. So let me reset the view a bit. Here we go. And we're gonna land pretty soon, because 80, 60... and then 40. You can see that we're now below the glide path, right? So we should be a little bit higher normally, but hey, we're landing on the runway. That's the most important thing. But normally you would stay a little bit higher and then make the soft touch on the runway. But here we go. We're almost there. Yes, now we did the touchdown, and this is how it works. So this is how easy it can work. So this was the end of the demo where we looked at how you can use RNAV in combination with RMP using the GPS information, because you can all see that we're using GPS, and this is how it works. Wasn't it difficult, right? RNAV is the bridge between the seat of your pants, flying of the past, and the high-tech automation of the future. Next time you're planning a flight in Microsoft Flight Simulator, skip the VORs, load up the RNAV approach, and see just how precise your flying can become. If this guide helped you understand your cockpit displays a little bit better, hit that like button and subscribe for the next video in the Microsoft Flight Simulator A to Z series. Let me know in the comments if you prefer classic ILS or the modern RNAV. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back next week.